The desert wind whispered her name long before he ever heard it. Pause for drama. In a land where men carried guilt heavier than their guns, and love was rarer than rain, two souls met beneath the dying sun. Slow, tense pause. He never meant to fall for her. Not in a town that already broke his heart once. Pause for emotion. But sometimes, the West gives you one last chance to love, or to lose everything again. The town of Redemption Ridge sat like a scar on the skin of the desert, half dust, half memory. Its saloon leaned with the wind. Its church bell hadn't rung in 3 winters, and its people had long since learned not to hope for rain. Out past the ridge, Elias Crow lived alone. A quiet man. A man who spoke more to his horses than to the folks in town. He'd been a rancher once, before the fire, before the graves. Now he just worked the land because it was the only thing that didn't talk back. Some said he was cursed. Others said he just stopped caring. Both were true. The day she arrived, the sky was the color of gunmetal. Elias was hauling fence posts when he saw the stagecoach rolling through the canyon, its wheels coughing dust. A single passenger stepped out when it stopped, a woman in a pale blue dress, with a hat too fine for this place. She moved like she didn't belong here, and yet, somehow, she did. The driver tipped his hat and muttered, "Mail-order bride, I reckon. Bound for Redemption Ridge." Elias froze. He hadn't heard those words, mail-order bride, since Clara, his late wife, had come to him that same way years ago, and that story had ended in ash. He turned away. "Ain't my concern," he told himself, but he couldn't help glancing back. The woman looked up, right at him, and in that moment, something in his chest shifted, like an old door creaking open after years of silence. Her name was Annabelle Hart, or so she said. She rented a room above the old mercantile and started working as a seamstress. Quiet, polite, and always looking over her shoulder, like the shadows might call her name. The men in town talked. They always did. She ain't from around here. Pretty as an angel, that one. Bet she's running from something. Elias didn't join in, but every time he came to town for supplies, he'd find himself stealing glances through the mercantile window at the woman stitching dresses by lamplight, her face soft in the glow. That night, as he rode back across the prairie, the wind carried the faint sound of church bells, though there hadn't been a service in months. Pause for drama. He looked back toward town and whispered to the empty air, "Don't do this to me again." Weeks passed. Annabelle stayed to herself, though her kindness had a way of finding those who needed it most. The old widow next door, the orphan boy who swept the saloon floors, even the lost souls drinking away their sins in the corner booth. But the nights were never quiet for her. Sometimes, when the wind howled through the shutters, she'd jolt awake, breath trembling, eyes wet. There were scars she hid, not on her skin, but in her silence. One afternoon, Elias found her stranded on the trail, her wagon wheel broken, the horse skittish. "Looks like you're in a pinch, miss," he said, dismounting. She smiled softly. "Seems the desert wanted to test me today." He knelt beside the wheel. Desert's got a cruel sense of humor. "So do men," she murmured. He looked up, and their eyes met again, longer this time. Something unspoken passed between them, something fragile, like the first drop of rain in a long drought. He fixed the wheel. She thanked him with a look that said more than words ever could. But before she rode off, she added, almost like a confession, "You remind me of someone I once knew, someone who wanted to be good again." Pause for emotion. He didn't sleep that night. From then on, they kept crossing paths, at the well, the market, the church steps where no one prayed anymore. And each time, the silence between them grew warmer, fuller. It wasn't love yet. It was something quieter, like a seed under snow, waiting for spring. But Redemption Ridge had a way of killing things before they bloomed. A stranger rode into town one evening, tall, sharp, with a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. He went by Clay Mercer, and his voice was the kind that made even the toughest men step back. He walked straight into the saloon and asked one question. "Where's the woman calling herself Annabelle Hart?" Pause for drama. The piano stopped. So did every breath. From his corner table, Elias froze. Clay smiled thinly. "She's got something that don't belong to her, and I aim to take it back." That night, Elias found Annabelle packing a small bag by candlelight. "You running?" he asked quietly. She turned, startled. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you, by the sound of it." She hesitated, then said, "He's not who you think, and neither am I." Elias took a step closer. "You can tell me." Her eyes glistened. I wish I could. The candle flickered, throwing her shadow against the wall, a trembling silhouette caught between light and dark. I thought I could start over here, she whispered. But the past, it always rides faster. He wanted to reach for her, to promise safety, redemption, something. But before he could, a gunshot shattered the night. The window behind her exploded. She screamed, ducking down as glass rained around her. Elias drew his revolver, heart pounding. Stay down. Outside, hooves thundered away into the desert dark. When silence fell, Annabelle was trembling. Blood dotted her sleeve, not deep, just grazed. He tore a strip from his shirt and wrapped her arm. You're safe now, he said, but the look in her eyes said otherwise. By dawn, word spread. Clay Mercer had vanished into the desert, but he'd be back. And when he came, there'd be blood. Annabelle stood on Elias's porch, the sunrise painting her face in gold. She said quietly, "You should let me go." He shook his head. "Ain't my way. You'll get yourself killed." "Maybe. But I ain't about to lose another ghost I never got to love." Pause for emotion. Her lip trembled. "Why are you doing this?" He looked out toward the endless sand. "Because sometimes you see something worth savant." That night, under a bleeding sunset, Elias saddled his horse. He wasn't a gunman anymore. But love, or what might have been love, can make a man remember the parts of himself he tried to bury. He rode toward the ridge, where Clay Mercer waited, a dark figure outlined against the fire-red sky. "Didn't think you'd come," Clay called. "I ain't one for letting devils roam free," Elias said. Clay smirked. "You don't even know what she's done." "Don't care," Elias answered. "Ain't a soul in this town without sin." Pause for tense silence. They drew at the same time. Two flashes. Two thunders. Two men thrown backward by fate. When the dust cleared, Clay Mercer lay still, and Elias Crow was on his knees, clutching his side, blood soaking through his shirt. Annabelle ran to him, tears cutting through the dirt on her cheeks. He smiled faintly. "Guess I didn't order an angel after all." She shook her head, pressing her hands against his wound. "Don't you dare talk like that." He reached up, brushed a strand of hair from her face. "If I go, you keep running, you hear? Find your freedom." Her voice broke. "I already found it. Right here." Pause for heartbreak. His hand went limp. The wind fell silent, and Redemption Ridge held its breath. The desert wind didn't stop that night. It moved through Redemption Ridge like a restless ghost, carrying the scent of gunpowder and rain that never came. Pause for drama. By sunrise, Elias Crow's blood had dried on the dust outside the ridge, a dark reminder that love in the West came at a price. The preacher said a few words over him, though no one could recall what they were. Only Annabelle listened. Only she cared. She stood by the grave long after everyone else had gone. The sky bruised purple, the earth cracked and dry. When the last shovelful of dirt hit the coffin lid, something in her broke. But she didn't cry. Not yet. She'd learned long ago that tears were a luxury the West didn't grant freely. For days, she didn't speak to anyone. She stayed in Elias's cabin, small, lonely, and still carrying the warmth of him in its walls. His jacket hung by the door, his boots by the bed. The man himself was gone, but his presence lingered like the echo of a prayer. Every morning she'd sit on the porch, staring toward the horizon, where the wind bent the grass like a sigh. She wanted to run, but her feet wouldn't move, because for the first time in her life, she'd found a place that had felt like home. And for the first time in her life, she'd found someone who'd seen her for more than what she was running from. A week later, the sheriff rode out to her place. He was an older man named Marshall Dugan, kind-eyed and tired, the kind of man who'd seen too many lives unravel under the same sky. He dismounted slowly and tipped his hat. "Ma'am," he said gently, "mind if I sit?" She nodded. He joined her on the porch. "You got a quiet place here." "Yes," she said. "Quiet can be cruel." He sighed. "Reckon it can." After a long silence, he said, "I figured you ought to know. Clay Mercer wasn't just after money. He was a bounty hunter. You got a price on your head down in Texas." Annabelle didn't flinch. "I know," she said. Pause for tension. The sheriff studied her face. "You care to tell me why?" She looked out over the land. "Because once, I did what I had to do to survive, and a man died for it." He nodded slowly. Elias knew, didn't he? Tears welled at her eyes. He never asked, but I think he did. Pause for emotion. After the sheriff left, she went inside and opened Elias's chest. Inside, beneath old letters and a worn Bible, she found something wrapped in cloth, a half-finished locket, the silver tarnished but beautiful. Inside it, one half was empty. The other held a lock of hair, pale gold, Clara's, his first wife's, and tucked beneath it, a note in Elias's handwriting. If ever I get another chance at love, I'll do it right this time. No ghosts, no lies, just truth. She pressed the paper to her heart and whispered, "You did it right, Elias, even when you didn't know it." Weeks turned to months. The prairie healed in its quiet way. Grass grew around the grave. The wind softened, and every night, Annabelle lit a lantern by the window, a small flame against the dark. One evening, as the sun fell behind the ridge, a rider appeared on the trail. She froze. For a heartbeat, she thought it was him, Elias, riding home through the sunset like he'd promised. But as the rider came closer, she saw the limp in his leg, the bandage across his ribs, the dust-caked face she'd thought she'd never see again. It was him. Pause for emotion. Elias Crow didn't die that night. Clay's bullet had gone clean through, missing his heart by an inch and leaving him unconscious till the morning. The preacher had buried an empty coffin, and Elias, too weak to protest, had let them think him gone. Until now. He dismounted, staggering slightly, eyes finding hers. "Guess I took my sweet time coming back," he said, voice rough as gravel. Annabelle stood frozen on the porch, tears spilling freely now. "You're real." He gave a faint, crooked grin. "Last I checked." She ran to him, no hesitation, no words, and threw her arms around his neck. He held her tight, the weight of months, of guilt, of hope pressing between them. Pause for quiet relief. Later, by the fire, he told her everything. How a trapper found him bleeding in the canyon. How it took weeks to heal. How he almost didn't come back. "I figured maybe you were better off thinking I was gone," he said softly. She shook her head. "Don't you ever think that again." He smiled sadly. "I thought angels didn't get second chances." She touched his cheek. "Maybe we both do." Spring came to Redemption Ridge. For the first time in years, rain fell, soft, steady, and real. The desert bloomed, and the world smelled of life again. Elias and Annabelle rebuilt the ranch together, plank by plank. She sewed curtains. He mended fences. They didn't talk much about the past anymore, not because it didn't hurt, but because love had finally given them something larger than sorrow to hold. Pause for serenity. At night, they'd sit on the porch, watching lightning flicker far off across the plains. He'd rest his hand over hers, call her darling, and the wind would hum through the grass like a hymn. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the desert in gold, Elias said quietly, "I used to think the West took everything from me, but now I reckon it just held on to what I wasn't ready for." She smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "And what's that?" He looked at her, eyes soft, voice barely a whisper. "You." Pause for emotion. But peace never stays long out here. A letter came from Texas that summer, sealed, official, and heavy as a gun. Annabelle opened it at the kitchen table. Her hands trembled as she read. Then she looked up at Elias, eyes wide. "They've pardoned me. The governor himself said my debt's paid." He smiled faintly. "Told you angels don't belong in chains." She laughed then, really laughed, for the first time since he'd met her. It was the kind of sound that made even the wind stop to listen. The years passed quietly after that. Some nights, she'd catch him staring out at the horizon, hat tipped low, that same faraway look in his eyes. She'd ask what he was thinking. He'd just smile and say, "How lucky a man can be to find heaven in the middle of hell." And she'd kiss him, slow and sure, the way only people who've been to the edge of loss can. Pause for warmth. When Elias Crow finally left this world, many years later, he did it the way he lived, quietly, gently, at dawn, with the desert wind whispering through the window. Annabelle found him sitting in his chair on the porch, his hat in his lap, his face turned toward the sunrise. He looked peaceful, like he'd finally outrun the ghosts. She buried him beside Clara, under the same tree that had grown green again with the seasons. And as the preacher spoke, she didn't cry. She just smiled through the tears that finally came. Because love like that doesn't die. It just changes shape. That night, she lit one last lantern and set it on the porch rail. Then she whispered into the wind, "You kept your promise, Elias Crow. You came back." The lantern flame flickered, then steadied, as if answering. She closed her eyes, the sound of the prairie wind filling the quiet between heartbeats. And somewhere, out across the desert, a voice seemed to echo back, soft, certain, eternal. I reckon I'll always find you, darling, no matter how far the wind blows. Pause for cinematic silence. The camera pans out, the ridge stretching endless beneath the bleeding sky. A single light glows from the cabin porch, a heartbeat against the dark. And as the music fades,